Right. So yeah. So there we go. I suppose first things first. I'd just like to thank the guys in Plan for inviting us along this evening. It's great to be here as always. And you know, you do really great work. We're always delighted to you know, we're always delighted to come and meet with you and you know, to talk at your events. And you know, you're really, you know, a great girl. Not just saying that to um for any other reason than, you know, I have a very strong belief that parent support groups are great places for information for people. And, you know, and information is quite often king in a lot of circumstances. Um, just an acknowledgement to our funders. We get a little bit of funding from the scheme to support national organisations, which allows us to do these kind of events. And ordinarily, we'd be doing them in a hotel room. We've been out with you guys a couple of times in the Crown Plaza there in Blanchardstown. Unfortunately, at the minute, as you know, we're all confined to Zoom. A little bit about ourselves. So Inclusion Ireland, we're the National Association for People with Intellectual Disabilities. I'm shamelessly going to plug our membership because we're doing a bit of a membership drive. If you want to join us, for folks that are not in receipt of a wage, so if you're on carer's allowance or you have a family member that's on disability allowance or not in receipt of anything at all, membership is €1 per annum. I think it's a tenner if you're in receipt of a wage. If you guys wanted to join as a group, you can ring up and we give you a reasonably decent rate. If you don't want to join us, that's great too. We're there on Facebook and Twitter. You can follow us, just search for us and do the like or whatever it is. Even apart from that, we've a regular e-newsletter. Well, we kind of have two e-newsletters to go out, but there's in general one goes out every month. So if you're interested in any of that stuff, just give my colleague Alex a call or an email and he'll add you to our lists, or whatever it is you want or don't want, as to say. So anyway, that's just available to people. So let's get stuck into it. Special education is where we're at. First thing, just to take a little bit of an overview of special education itself. There's a spectrum of support, support for young people, young autistic people, young people with disabilities, young people with specific learning needs. So first, looking at the classes, vast majority of kids in Ireland, they go to a mainstream class, 78, 80%, no support at all whatsoever, and they get along just fine. Then we've got supports that are in mainstream classes. Could be an SNA, could be resource teaching, which is now special needs teaching, could be accessibility equipment, you know, assistive technology, whatever it may be. Then we've got the next level from that is the special class in mainstream or special school. There's nearly 2,000 of those now. There can be any amount in them, any amount of children. So if it's a special class, we'll say, for example, for children with a moderate intellectual disability, that's around 8 children. The autism ones are 6 children. And there are other ones, emotional behavioural difficulty, again, that's about 6 children. And then we've got special schools for a whole array of needs. There's about 8,000 or 9,000 children in Ireland attend a special school, and they're from, not all of them, but the vast majority of them are from 4 or 5 years of age right up until you leave school at 18. Education supports, wow, looks impressive when you see them all on one page. And I am quite mindful, people will be going, it's great putting on paper, but getting the access to them is one thing. Just a little note on special needs assistance. So in the old days, a child was granted a special needs assistant, whereas now they're granted access. So the special needs assistant allocation is given to the school, and the school then has to divvy up how they're going to allocate their SNA resources among the children that require it. So, you know, quite often a Ceno might, you know, allocate one SNA between 3 or 4 children. So, a principal. Sorry, I think that there's someone just there might want to mute themselves. It's just coming over to speak, which is fine. It's not too bad. Well, it's not annoying me too much anyway, but it might be for others. So I should have said that at the beginning, that the vast majority of people in the education system, they're really, really good people. They've gone in there to improve the lives of young people through education, and that's why they're there. Like all walks of life, there are difficulties, and we're probably going to be speaking a lot about the difficulties tonight. But just to be mindful that the majority of people in there are really great people. Another form of support that's very, very common. I know most of your children would be on the autism spectrum, so resource teaching. Most of any of the children that are in resource teaching is only available in mainstream schools. So if your young person attends a mainstream class, they might be getting some resource teaching. Again, that's allocated to the school, and they divvy it up as they see fit. It can be in a number of ways. It can be in one-to-one, can be in small groups or whatever. July provision, I'll come to in a moment. I have a separate slide on that. There's home tuition. One thing I would say is, though, that if you're applying for any of these resources for your child, what I would say is, get information. Information is king. So it is. So the first thing that I would do if I was looking for any of these things is go off, find the circular. So if we're talking about assistive technology, go and Google Assistive Technology Circular, Department of Education and Skills. You'll get it up. It'll be the first hit. So the reason I always say get the circular is they're very, very specific. So assistive technology, the wording is specific. Say, if I'm applying for a laptop for myself, it is essential for Mark O'Connor to have a laptop to access the curriculum. Without it, he cannot access the curriculum. That's the wording that's required. It'd be grand if Mark had a laptop there. It'd really help him with his schoolwork. You're not getting a laptop. Home tuition, it's quite specific. For the younger cohort, there's an age criteria around it and around the amount of hours. We say, for example, if you had a child that had a mental health difficulty, which is quite common for young autistic children, especially when they get into the teenage years, there's a maximum amount of hours, for example, and that changes whether they're in primary school or in secondary school. So they're quite specific, and again, there's specific wording that's needed from the clinician that's made the recommendation. The Irish exemption, again, there's specific wording on it. You have to go to the principal. I think from memory, the child has to be in the lowest 10 percentile around language and all of that. NEP psychologists, again, NEP psychologists are something that are severely rationed. Schools get about one assessment per 50 children. So just bear in mind that, a principal might often be in a very, in a position that none of us would ever want to be in that they're deciding which child is going to have the assessment and which isn't. A few more a few more of the resources there that are available to schools. So look, the one I could say is, and we'll discuss this as we go through the presentation, is that some of the resources are allocated to the school, who can allocate them as they see fit. We've spoken about the resource and the SNA, and some are allocated to the child alone: home tuition, July provision, transport. The difference is that determines where you're going with your advocacy, and it can determine the effectiveness of how effective your advocacy is going to be. Because if you're advocating to the school, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, quite often you can be limited in how far you can go with your advocacy. If you're going up against the department, you've got recourse to a fairly independent office, the Ombudsman for Children, that has a reasonable amount of clout over departments, but not over schools. And we'll discuss that again in a moment. So, short note on July provision. Now, I know the vast majority of parents here probably have a young autistic child. So you automatically qualify for July provision. Why? I can tell you why. The reason is that back around the year 2000 or thereabouts, someone in the Department of Education decided it would be a good idea, and there's no other reason. So if you've got a child with a moderate intellectual disability or with Down syndrome or whatever it may be, emotional behavior disturbance, severe emotional behavior disturbance, they might also need July provision and could benefit greatly from it, but you won't qualify at the moment. However, I would advise you very strongly to apply for it. And the reason being, I suppose about 3 years back, two families at the same time came to Inclusion Ireland completely separately. Children with Down syndrome didn't qualify for July provision, but both of them had a recommendation from an educational psychologist that it was needed because the children had regressed so much over previous summers. There was a lot of catching up for the children to do. And so straight away, Inclusion Ireland can seek free legal advice. There's a scheme for organisations like us to seek free legal advice. And we sought that, and they said, we'll take the case for these families. And they went to the Equality Tribunal with it, which is the Workplace Relations Commission. That's where that's homed. And it took so long, they eventually had to go into the High Court. But both of those children got access to the July provision programme. Now, it wasn't adjudicated upon in a court, so it doesn't apply to everybody. So if there's anybody on here who currently doesn't, whose child doesn't currently qualify for July provision, I would strongly advise you that when the department put the programme up again for expressions of interest, express your interest. The department will tell you don't qualify. Ignore that and apply. So the reason I would say to you, go to the second stage and apply, you need somebody to say, we're not allowing you into this scheme. So discrimination is an act. So having a notice to say these people qualify isn't discriminatory against anyone else. But when you apply and they say to you, you do not qualify, that's when discrimination has possibly taken place. The National Council for Special Education believe that this programme is open to an equal status case. So that's what Official Ireland is saying in relation to it. We just have one question there on July provision, and it says, will it be provided this year? The answer to that, if I was to give the answer at the minute, is we simply don't know. The rumblings that are going on and what we're hearing behind the scenes are that they're looking at a summer program a bit like last year. So it would be a regular July provision program, but open to a few more folks than before. So something similar to last year, we're led to believe, is in the pipeline, but there's nothing official been announced just yet. And just to let you know that the solicitors that helped those two families that eventually had to go into the courts, they said they'd be available to at least, at a very minimum, run a legal workshop for people to advise them on how they can challenge the decision not to allow them access to July provision. So just getting into speaking up, and what I would say as well is that the online space, it's not the best place for having these kind of sessions. They're much better when you're in a room and you can tease out ideas, and even done over a number of sessions. Unfortunately, we've got maybe an hour to an hour and a half, so it really is a whistle-stop tour. But what I have done is, and anyone who registered through Zoom, you should have gotten an email. So the email contains these slides, a number of resources on Inclusion Ireland's website, and there was another attachment, and it's a really brilliant guide to advocacy. It was written by parents in Australia for parents. It's got everything in there about how to write a letter, how to approach a meeting. It's a super guide. So that's your backup tool, and this is going to be kind of like a whistle stop and just speaking to the main points. So I suppose in terms of advocacy, and this first point, it's not always the easiest thing to do, because quite often the reason you're going to be approaching a school is when something has happened. We've had parents have come to us in Inclusion Ireland, for example, whose whose young family member may have been put in a room alone for a period of time. And I mean, that is really, really emotional to hear things like that. But we always say to people, treat the people that are across the room from you, treat them with respect and value them. And just one little anecdote. I remember going down to Limerick. We were supporting this really, really hard case down in Limerick, and it was mainly the mum and the daughter that would be at the meetings, the young lady. So I travelled down to Limerick one day, and the dad was there as well. I introduced myself, and the mum turns around and says to me, "All hell's going to break loose. We've had an updated NEPS assessment, and it seems the historical one was so far off the mark. And my husband is just so angry about it." So we went into the room. As soon as everyone got into the room, he banged the table and he goes, "Right, what effing so and so made an effing balls of that effing NEPS assessment?" He says, your professionalism has now been called into question. And do you know what happened? All the professionals got up and they walked out of the room, and the four of us were left sitting there looking at each other, and that was it. That was the end of the meeting. Nothing was achieved. So that's kind of what I say about the respect piece, because although we've got serious emotions in there, if it gets to that level, it allows people to walk out of the room and not address the issue. Nothing gets solved, and you're back to square one. I've just got one other question there. Right, I've just got a form home and saying to be, yep, not summer provision, July. Wondering about, I suppose just the question is, will it be open to as many people this year? Again, as I'm saying, the indications we're getting, now whether that's the department flying kites or not, the indications are it should be available, but I think we're getting a slightly contradictory message here that it may not be available to all children, saying they just got a form home asking for details and saying to be paying the applicant directly. So mind you, I know there is another scheme ongoing at the minute, which is the supplementary scheme that was open to children with disabilities who were out of school for a long period. Very unworkable scheme, but I don't know if it relates to that one either. So just going back to this, in terms of advocacy, empower the person as much as possible. So I know with a lot of you guys, your children may be young, but if they're 14, 15, 16 and they're well able to, bring them into the room, allow them to speak up for themselves. It can be really, really valuable to hear the voice of the young person. And sometimes when the person on the other side of the table hears the views of the young person, it can have a profound effect. Be loyal. You're only in here for one person. It's your child. That's whose side you're on alone. You don't have to. While I said schools are quite often in difficult positions, you're in there advocating for your child. So that's your number one loyalty and only loyalty. Some of these would relate to ourselves. In Inclusion Ireland, especially the piece around the quality and monitoring. But it's always worth reflecting, even after a meeting, to think, did I do that? Is there a better way I could have done that, so that the next time the next time you do it, that you can learn as you go along every time, and the guide that we've given out there, will especially, it'll tool you up with best practice. Independence is crucial. So we'll say, for example, this is especially true if you're going to get information from somewhere. An example I could think of is that I was supporting a parent one time at an expulsion meeting in a school. And so the school had a solicitor present from a very large firm in Dublin that does all the education work, and that was fine. And then we appealed it to the patron body. And when we appealed to the patron body, who should be independent from the school technically, the exact same solicitor was sitting across the table from us. So there was absolutely no independence there, or conflict of interest, and we cited that, but anyway, it didn't wash. Eileen is just asking, are preschoolers and early intervention eligible for July provision? So there's a yes and a no answer to that, unfortunately. So ordinarily, no, they're not, because July provision is the extension of the school year. So technically, they haven't done a school year. The opposite end of that is that if your young person has just left school, they are eligible because it's an extension of the school year. But last year, the summer program, so any child that was moving from preschool into a special class or special school, I know very, very specific only, but they were allowed access to the summer scheme last year, not strictly July provision. So they got access to the summer scheme last year if you were going into a special school or class, but ordinarily, no, you wouldn't have access to the July provision scheme. Yeah, the ASD unit, is it discriminatory for a school? That's a question that I suppose, I'll be straight up and say that's one that would require legal advice. Schools aren't obliged under the Education Act, and the Department of Education certainly can't force them to open an ASD unit, which is a significant difficulty. I suppose my layman's thinking on it is that a school would say, well, we don't have an ASD unit, but what we will do is we will apply for the extra resource teaching for you. We'll apply for the SNA, and we'll apply for a grant to put in some sensory equipment and all of that stuff. And we'll put as much in for you as we can. The second part of your question around the 2018 policy, I've got a slide on that I'll come to in a few minutes. So if I'll just I'll hold that part of the question until that, if it's okay. Last piece, advocacy dilemmas. You mightn't really face them in the school scenario, but wind the clock on a couple of years when you've got a young adult. You know, they may be approaching you around you know, family planning issues and wanting to make those decisions. You might be totally against that, and God Almighty, you know, I couldn't imagine my my young person getting into that kind of stuff. Or they might say to you, look, I want you to support me to move out of home and to engage. You know, I need to move out of home at some point. You know, whereas a real like I say this as a father of a 22-year-old man with an intellectual disability. You know, I like to hold on to him, but I know that he probably should move out at some point. One of his brothers, who's only a year older than him, has moved out 4 years ago. His other brother, he's a real Irish son in that. I don't know if he's ever going to move out. But, you know, so sometimes you're in and you're advocating on a situation that maybe makes you feel uncomfortable, but, you know, you have to be thinking about the person that's with you and where they're at. Just some general advice, and all this, there's a lot more detail on this in the little advocacy guide that I've given you. Corresponding writing. It's, you know, if you correspond in writing, you've got a paper trail. I always say to people, just imagine where you could be in 12 months. None of us ever want to end up in the High Court. No way. But those two parents that came to us around the Down syndrome issue and July provision, they ended up in the High Court about 15 months after they came to Inclusion Ireland. I'm sure in a million years, they never thought the phone call they had with us would end up with them being on the steps of the High Court. So corresponding writing, hopefully it never goes that you need it. So what I would also say is if you've had a phone call or you've been at a meeting, take some notes. It's always good practice to, you know, if you've had a meeting with the principal and you've agreed something, you know, you can email them back and say, dear Mr. O'Connor, thanks for the meeting today. This is my understanding of what was agreed. That's the same as you know, that's the same as having a written, you know, a written note of the meeting. And those contemporaneous notes, you know, there are legal cases where contemporaneous notes have been taken, you know, as an accurate record of what had happened at the time. Be informed and get informed. And from a reputable source. The last couple of slides on this has got some really good sources of information. I would always say, you know, your local parent support group is also great for some advice. not all remedies that people are aware of at a national level, you know, the other way around, there's often a local remedy. So when you're speaking to, somebody has asked me there a question about a local school, you know, they may ask that to one of the parents that is on this line, and the other parent go, God, my young fella's in that school, the head teachers are so-and-so. The school a mile down the road, they're absolutely brilliant. That kind of stuff is so invaluable. You get that from other parents. But if you're going into a situation, and we'll be talking about a few of them in a moment, you may need legal advice. You may need accurate sources of information. The Citizens Information website, very good for stuff like social welfare. Department of Education's website, National Council for Special Education has got some brilliant information guides. I know in terms of the resource allocation, we all feel they could do better, and we've all had run-ins with some of the Cenos and all of that kind of stuff. But in terms of just pure advice, they've got some great stuff on their website. I think sometimes Facebook pages, just be careful about it. Some of the advice I've seen on Facebook pages, would leave a lot to be desired. For example, God, if somebody did that to my child, I'd be going down and having murder at that school. I mean, you go down and have murder at the school, there's a chance they're going to call the guards on you. They don't take that stuff too well. I've seen other advice, go to the Board of Education. There's no Board of Education in Ireland. That's just an aside. We simply don't have one. So get your information from a reputable source, and be happy about it. As I said, always remain calm, treat others with respect. I tend to go into meetings and say to myself, right, look, treat the person across the table the same as I'd like to be treated, but don't be afraid to ask the hard questions. Asking a hard question is still treating someone with respect. I consider the object of the advocacy, and I always say, look, have your A goal. Sometimes it's good to have a backup as well, So, I'm going in and I'm having the discussion, and I want Mark to get 5 hours of special ed teaching. Would I settle for 4? I might. Would I settle for 2 hours in a group circumstance and then maybe 2 hours on his own? That mightn't be too bad either. So, have a backup that you're prepared to settle for. And I'm saying, look, if the situation is tricky, and there's quite often tricky situations, get that outside advice, and we'll point in the direction of a few of them in a wee bit. Sorry, I'm just going to go back a second. I think I've got a question. Right. So we're getting a nice bit of information there from Angela, and she tells us that julyprovision.com has an update. So if people have any questions, there's a quite recent update there that I wasn't aware of. So have a look there and you'll get the latest. Right, so complaint options. As I was saying earlier, it generally falls into 2 categories. We're talking tonight about education, so it falls into 2 categories. If it's something that could be appealed to the department or the National Council, it's a more robust option you've got, because you can eventually go to the Ombudsman for Children, and there are options there that are reasonably, I know they're still within those organisations, but they're reasonably independent. If you're going to the school, let's say a principal has made a decision that your child is only getting 2 hours of SNA support, and you appeal that, you're appealing to the person that's made the decision. They've probably weighed things up in their own mind, and they'll be saying, look, I'm not changing my mind. After that, where do you go? You go to the Board of Management. The principal is on the school Board of Management. You can go to the Ombudsman if you want, but the Ombudsman has little or no sway over schools. And in fact, on a Primetime Investigates programme a number of years back, the Ombudsman then called to have extra powers to be able to compel schools, to act upon their recommendations. While the Ombudsman is toothless to a certain extent, when they make a recommendation to someone like the NCSE or the Department of Education and Skills, they listen and they act. The ombudsman has a lot of sway over those kind of organisations. So hopefully, if you have an issue, it would be one of those you'd be going to. What I would say is that there has been a move in recent years to put stuff like, so for example, a couple of years ago, you could complain about SNA resources to the NCSE. They've put that into the hands of schools now. And, the same with resource teaching. It really limits your complaint, your redress options. When both of those things have been done as an advocacy organisation, we asked the department, you need to have an independent appeals process. They took it on board and didn't act on it. The NCSE, in their policy advice around SNAs, they themselves asked for an independent appeals process around it, and the department didn't do it. So, what is the school complaint system? What are you going to complain about? First of all, your child mightn't be getting treated right at school inaction on bullying, short school days. I don't know if any of you guys have experienced it, but it's something that is more prevalent among children, especially young autistic children. We did a bit of research a few years ago, and that's what came out of it. So that's an issue you can go to the school with. I've put it there in bold. Don't contact the Department of Education and Skills. You're going to waste 20 minutes of your life. All they're going to do is tell you to complain through the school. The department have no role and will take no role in a complaint about a school. They simply won't. And it's on their own website in bold. We don't handle complaints about schools. So don't go there. So first stage, informally speak with the class teacher. Quite often, complaints are small things. It might seem big to you, but the teacher mightn't realize they're doing something, or that they're not acting, or they're acting in a certain way. So we'd say, for example, they could be saying something in class that's upsetting your child. I know when my son was young, certain words would trigger him. And we were able to speak to his class teacher and go, don't use this word or that word. They trigger emotions in him, which lead to behaviour in school and at home. So they're things that can be remedied quite easily. Or your child might need extra movement breaks, sensory breaks. Teacher mightn't just be as aware of them. So they're things that can be easily solved informally. If that doesn't work, you can informally speak to the principal. The next is informally speak to the chair of the board of management. And if you're not resolved at that stage, you're formally writing to the board of management. As I did say, you can go to the Ombudsman for Children's Office, but the power that they have to compel a school to do anything is relatively limited. So if the school hasn't changed the action that is cause of complaint, at that point, it's probably not going to change. But it is worth going to the Office of the Children's Ombudsman all the same, because each year between 40 and 50% of their complaints are to do with education. It gives them a greater argument to have a greater say in relation to schools. So maybe it's worth it for that after all. And it is relatively easy to do. You can do it online. There's an online form. So a common complaint that we get in Inclusion Ireland quite a lot of is a Section 29. People call it a Section 29 complaint. So it's a complaint under Section 29 of the Education Act of 1998, to give it its full title. There's loads of information on our website in Inclusion Ireland. We've got the link off then to the department's website for fuller information. So essentially, what is a Section 29? If your child has been refused a school place, if they've been suspended for more than 20 days, which is an extraordinarily long
I know,
amount.
Education Act 1998. Okay. Don't know what it is. You have your headphones, you want Maria?
Does somebody want to go and...
Maria?
Somebody might want to go and mute there. Just I can't see all the participants, so it'd be great if they could. Yeah, so and the other one is if a child has been expelled. So you can independently appeal it. Now, when we say independently appeal, an appeals committee that you would eventually end up at, it's made up of, probably an ex-principal, probably someone from Ieps, and probably somebody from the inspectorate is generally who you're going to get there. So people often question the independence of it. I've been to about a dozen of them, and I generally find them relatively independent. So what does the process look like? There's an online form on the department's website. You fill that in, somebody will contact you. The whole process has to be done and dusted within 42 days. So first stage is a mediator will come out to you. Now, it's not mediation in the traditional sense. Somebody will come out. I imagine in these COVID days it'd be done by Zoom, but traditionally somebody would come out to the house to get your side of the story. Is there something that can be done? Now, if somebody's refusing you a school place, what's the option? It's, well, I want a school place. You can't have a half a school place or a quarter of a school place. It's an all or nothing situation. They go to the school, they provide a short report that goes to that committee that I've just described. So you go into this committee, the school will go in, you're allowed to bring somebody with you. In general, only 2 people are allowed to speak from each side. Now, they will give a little bit of leeway in that. So if you had an expert witness, for example, I was at one where there was a clinical psychologist present from St. Michael's House, and that was really useful. I was at another one where a speech and language therapist was present, and that was really useful. So you are allowed to bring an expert witness along with you if you need it. You're allowed to bring an advocate along with you if you can get someone to go with you. So the focus of it is, were fair procedures applied, and was the enrolment or the discipline policy followed to the letter of the law? Now, we've tended to find that schools have got a lot better with their enrolment policies. When I first started looking at these, it would have been back about 2012, and quite often the enrolment policies, a lot of them would have loopholes in them, and you'd get in a loophole. That's something that's not there anymore. But if your child is suspended or expelled, there is a book from the National Education and Welfare Board, that's now TUSLA, by the way, that talks about the actions a school has to do before they expel a child or before they suspend a child. So, have they gone and got outside agencies in to help? We often find they haven't. And that sometimes gets you back in because the school hasn't done enough to prevent the suspension or expulsion. So was the child treated fairly, or was the policy followed? That's generally it. And a short school day, which I think I have another slide on in a moment, is a suspension and may be appealed in this manner also. But you need to have gotten to the 20 days first. Which, if your child's only attending for 2 hours a day, it's a long time before 20 days are up. It's the guts of 2 months before they've been suspended for a full 20 days. So reduced timetables, we know that it impacts children with disabilities more than anyone else. Technological University Dublin and Inclusion Ireland did the research, and it impacts 1 out of every 4 autistic children through their school lifetime. Sorry, 1 in 3. 1 in 4 children with disabilities and 1 in 3 young autistic children. So it is prevalent. You don't have to agree to it. Now, when I say you don't have to agree to it, what parents told us was that a principal might say to them, look, it's a short school day, it's a suspension, and you're going to be on fast track to expulsion. So quite often parents are put under a lot of pressure to agree to it. If you agree to it, it's technically not a suspension. If you don't agree to it, it technically is. So just, be mindful. You don't have to agree to it. Your child has a right to their education. Reduced timetable, as we're saying, it can be appealed under Section 29 that we just spoke about. But 20 days is a shocking long time to have to elapse. Another option for you is, if the child's put on a short school day, straight to the Board of Management. You don't have to go through the class teacher. You don't have to go through the principal. They've made the decision. You're going to be obviously having the conversation with the principal. I don't agree to this. The principal goes, well, it's happening, full stop. So at that point, you're right to the Board of Management. There are rules on the way for this. They've been paused for the last year because of COVID-19, but they were consulted on 6 months before COVID-19 happened. So they should be well in train at this stage. But I suppose what the department are telling us, if it's not got anything to do with the leaving or reopening of schools, we don't want to know about it. So I can't remember, I think it was possibly Eileen that asked around the ASD units. So this is something, and I know it's something that has happened in the D9-15 area already. I think it happened summer of 2019, possibly even 2018. And that was it would have been 2019. And it was the first time this act was used in an Irish context. So it's an add-on to the Education Act, and it's the Education Admissions to School Act 2018. So that allows the minister basically to direct schools to open special classes for children where there's no other option.
Yeah.
Sorry, Katrina, I'll just put you on mute there if you don't mind. So, but how do you get this to be actioned as a parent? So, as we understand it from looking at the Act, what needs to happen is, as a parent, you'd need to apply to a reasonable number of autism classes. You know, if you apply to one, the Ceno can easily say to you, "Ah, God Almighty, you know, sure, you only applied to one. Apply to a few more." I'd apply to 3 or 4. You could do a Section 29 appeal if you want. It's not mandatory, but you could if you want. Now, at this stage, if you're applying to schools and they're telling you, oh, by the way, apply in writing, because you technically haven't been refused if they just say we've no place over the phone. So apply in the ordinary way, you get refused. You've been refused by 3 or 4 schools. Go to the Ceno and be very specific in the language you use with the Ceno. I want you to use your powers under the 1990 or under the 2018 Act, and I want you to conduct a survey of the schools in this area and see if it meets the needs of children with autism, because my child cannot get a school place for love nor money, and I know loads of other children the exact same. So that's the kind of thing you need to be saying to the Ceno. They are then obliged to go out and look at the local area and what's available in schools. Are there any places out there that you maybe haven't just stumbled across? But if there aren't, they have to do an assessment of the local school area and see where classes can be put in. They provide a report to the minister, and at that stage, the minister can write to all of those schools and direct them, if needs be, to open a class. Now, the only problem is that the class may be opened in a school that is not accessible for you. It could be miles away from you. You've got 3 children. 2 of them are going to the school around the corner, and your autistic child is told they have to go to a school a mile down the road. As a parent, you want to see your 3 children going to the same school. There's no appeal built in if they don't open the class in the school that you wanted. You know, so I suppose, you know, you need to be lucky in that it's your school. It's certainly not by design. I've just a couple of questions here that I will go to. What to do when the Ceno does not grant allocate a place in an ASD class, even though the school accept the child under the school enrollment policy? I can't see why. I can't see how a Ceno can interfere. The only way, to me, a Ceno could interfere is if you're applying for a place in an ASD class and the child actually doesn't, you know, and the child doesn't have a diagnosis of autism. That, to me, is the only way a Ceno could object, because nobody can interfere. You know, as long as it's not, and in fairness, school enrollment policies, a lot of them are highly discriminatory. Let's not pretend they're not. But school enrollment policies, like the department can't interfere in them, Cenos can't interfere in them. So if a school accepts the child, unless they don't fit the criteria for the class, they should be allowed to enroll. I can't see how the Ceno can interfere in that. If you wanted to give me, you know, if you wanted to send me an email to mark@inclusionireland.ie with a little bit more details, you know, we could maybe tease it out over an email. We're just getting another question. Is there a time frame on how long that report from the Ceno should take? There's not. As quick as is reasonably practicable. From what we understand, the Cenos actually get their bit done relatively quick and get it into the department. The piece then is how quick the department are to act. And in your area when this was previously done, and on the south side of Dublin when it was previously done, the minister wrote out the schools on the week of school holidays. So, their timing isn't great on this stuff. To my mind, if they need classes to be opening in September, they need to be writing to schools the previous September. There's a lot of planning. You need to recruit. You need to find the space and all of that. And what? Yeah, look at in terms of it's a very good question there around if your children, if you've got two children already at school and they're going to X school and you want your child to go there and they need the support of an ASD class. Yeah, I'd agree with you. A good first step is to meet up with the principal and ask would they consider opening one. Because if a school is willing to do it and they've got the children there, it should be a relatively seamless process, because there is nowhere in the greater Dublin area that has got capacity for those classes at the moment. So that would be, and how long does it take to set up? They could be set up pretty quick, but if I was going to be approaching a school, I wouldn't be waiting till the last minute. So if you wanted your child to start at 5 years of age, I'd be approaching them at 3 or 4. Now, bear in mind, your child can still start in the mainstream end of things if that's an appropriate situation with the supports, until the better thing comes along. But you don't know whether the better thing is going to come along then. So, but I'd approach them as soon as can be possible. Approach the Ceno as well. Ask the Ceno to approach the school. That's an additional option. Just on the special classes, there is a little bit more information at that Facebook link. We did a Q&A on it when the Act was quite new. So it just goes through that in a little bit more detail if you're interested in it. So just a little bit about IEPs now. I'm not going to go too deep into the IEPs, but the main reason for it is to say, your involvement as a parent and what you should reasonably expect from one. We hear varying stories. Like I've spoken to many people over the years, educators, parents, principals, etc., academics, and they'll tell you that some people have an IEP, they've never seen it. Oh, sorry, the mum and dad have never seen it. For others, it's a living document that they're consulted on a couple of times a year and they get a great input to it, and there's everything in between. So this is just looking at, and I would say the NCSE, again, they've got a really great document around IEPs. I see a couple of questions in there. I'll come to them in a couple of minutes, if that's okay. So the NCSE, again, they've got a really great document on IEPs, but this is kind of taken some of that and, what you should be thinking of and what your involvement should be as a parent. So just to be mindful, EPSN, that's the Education of Persons with Special Education Needs. So the EPSN Act, it's not fully commenced. So individual education plans, because of that, they're not on a statutory footing, but you should ask for one. Now, when we say an IEP, that's the name for it, but because the Association of Secondary Teachers in Ireland and the Teaching Union of Ireland have issued instructions to their members not to take part in IEPs, school teachers have kind of thumbed their nose at that a little bit and they've gone and they've called them student support files or whatever. So it might have a different name, but for all intents and purposes, it's an IEP. If your child doesn't have one, it is best practice, so ask for one. So there's the parent's role. Look, and this is taken out of the NCSE's guidelines. A parent should be consulted about the plan and have an input into it, but be facilitated and be involved in the preparation of the plan. You should be facilitated to be involved. It should be done at your pace, to your level, whatever type of involvement you want. Even when it's done and dusted, you receive a copy of the plan. If anything changes, because, as I was saying, my son's now through the education system, but, I can recall that we might have set a target at the start of the year and the school would come back and go, God, he's achieved that target wonderfully. We want to move on to something else. In my son's case, it would have been typing. He was brilliant, very proficient typer, still is. So the start of the typing program with him, he latched onto it straight away. So they said, right, look, we're going into Microsoft Word and all these other things. Or it might be that when they started a program, they say, look, we're going to have to chip that back a little bit. We're perhaps a little bit too ambitious. You should be getting informed of any of that. And any review of the plan that's done in-house in the school, you should be getting a report back about that. And again, this is what it says in the NCSE's documentation on it. Again, the key objective of the plan, it's to maximize parental involvement, make the experience of parents as positive and supportive as possible. I speak to parents who tell me it's a battle going in there. Other parents tell me it's a wonderful experience. It should be a wonderful experience. That's what you should be aiming for. That's what the school should be aiming for. The advanced planning, as we're saying in the last slide, it's so important. Again, the school should be letting parents know their rights and responsibilities and what to expect, and encourage the involvement of parents. Is there behaviour that's going on at home that will help in terms of the plan? So I can recall, I remember one stage the school come back, God, this unusual behaviour has started, has come about in your son. And we can, God, yeah, we just noticed that at home. It's a reaction to such and such a thing, and they were able to say, look, perhaps limit the interaction there, and we'll see how it goes. So quite often what's going on in the school can come from a home. Now, I just have a couple of questions. I'm just going to see there's a few in there, so I'm just going to have a look and see where we're at. Right, so that's one person had to hop off early. So just to know the recording is available if you want to look back. Why aren't there more ASD units when it's clearly a massive need? Speculatively, what I'd say is that a lot of schools have opened them and they didn't get the therapeutic supports that were promised originally. And there isn't often the level of expert teacher out there to staff them that you would really need, and all of that. And what I would say is, even though it's no excuse, the administrative headache for a principal in one of these classes is way beyond what you can imagine. And principals talk to each other, and they'll say, God, I opened 2 or 3 classes for children with autism, and the administrative headache is just off the chart. So, by the way, I'm not saying any of these things are right, but they would be some of the reasoning for it. And then other schools, and I know because parents have come to us from this area, there are quite a lot of secondary schools in South Dublin are very proud that 100% of their school leavers go to university and go to UCD, and they don't want anything getting in the way of that. Now, that's quite a cynical view in the world, but that's what some parents tell us from that area. So in terms of the UN CRPD, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, what's the government's response for the Ieps and Act not been commenced? I would say we're talking about autism classes tonight. Even those particular classes wouldn't be in line with the UN Convention. The UN Convention would say that we should have supports so good in mainstream schools and adaptations so good in mainstream schools that all children can attend. Now, that's something that you guys, I hope nobody's fallen off the chair when I said that, by the way. It's very hard to envisage it when you're in the trenches at the moment fighting for every 5 minutes of SNA support your child gets. It's very hard to have a vision of schools so well resourced that all children can attend them. And, to me, if we move in that direction, and, it's something that we as an organisation would support, it's a 10 or 15 year journey to get the supports in place, to get the teachers properly trained. And all teachers, like, for example, at second level, you might be surprised to know that only 4% of teachers at second level have a postgrad qualification of any description in special ed. Less than 20% have any CPD in the area. How's that meant to support children with disabilities? It's not. Josepha Madigan wants to review the Ieps Act on a non-statutory basis. Yes, that is something that has been ongoing for quite a while, and it's not appropriate because while that act is not commenced, your child doesn't have a legal right to an assessment, nor the supports that are identified within that assessment. So we've been advocating for the commencement of the Act for a long, long time, but it's falling on deaf ears. They're afraid of the resources that would have to go into it. Just advice that I would give parents going into an IEP process: be confident. This is your child. It's their educational journey. While the vast majority, as I said at the beginning, while the vast majority of teachers, they have in their hearts to do their best for your child possible, at the end of the day, it's your child. And you want the best for your child. Be ambitious for them. Ensure that the plan, the IEP plan, is ambitious for your child as well. Has the plan got goals? Short-term goals, long-term goals? By the way, what did we say last year about writing? And did we meet the goals on writing last year? And if not, why not? There's, there's probably a logical explanation for that. Maybe it's you need extra occupational therapy for pencil grip or something like that. If the child's old enough, as I said earlier, empower the child, get them involved. I know that that's not always possible. Some of our children are non-verbal communicators. My young chap, he can speak, but in the main, he's a non-verbal communicator. Involving him in an IEP process would have been extremely difficult, and it's something that we never put him through. If you're daunted as a parent, bring along a friend or an advocate. Always tell someone in advance. I have arrived up at places the odd time, and the parents said to me, I haven't told them you're coming, and I've been refused entry once or twice, so they're not obliged to let someone else come in. So it's always well to tell them in advance you're bringing somebody with you. Just tell them, oh, I'm a wee bit worried, I'm panicky about these things, I want to bring someone for support. You can disagree with areas of the plan, especially if they're not ambitious enough. Offer your own suggestions. You can say, God, we're doing this at home. We've taught Mark how to bake scones already at home. Why don't you move on to, making lasagna? It's a great skill he could bring with him when he leaves home eventually. And I wish somebody had taught me that skill before I left home. This is what an IEP should look like. This is the template and there are numerous templates out there, if you look at them, but, current skills, what's the goal? How are we going to get towards that goal, and who's going to implement it? Because bear in mind, best will in the world, your child is only at school for 180 days a year, 5 hours, 40 minutes a day. Now, I know during the COVID period, that was probably zip for most people. So a lot of the education and educating happens at home, especially in the area where we are. We supplement it with at home experiential learning and all that kind of stuff. So who's going to implement the goal? There might be something for you to do at home, but most of it will relate to the school. Just a quick look at transitions. Not going again, it's a whistle-stop tour. What I would say about transitions is NCSE's website, they've got great little booklets that are there. They describe it, they talk about the supports that are available, and how to plan for it and what you should be doing. But just some general advice around it. I'd be planning 2 years in advance at least. And the reason I say that is, you remember I said earlier that all school policies are discriminatory. One of the discriminatory pieces in it is, and I know schools have a rationale for this, but they ask for children with special education needs to be assessed. No assessment, no school place. I mean, I've got 3 children. Only one of them is autistic. And he was the only one that had to get an assessment going to school. I know schools need the assessment because it's how to get their resources. The other 2 didn't need to be assessed. Is that discriminatory? Well, you're differentiating between people, possibly. If they don't meet a certain criteria. So we'll say, for example, you're probably well familiar with it in Dublin. The vast majority of ASD classes in Dublin will not allow a child in unless they've got a mild intellectual disability or none. The gas thing is you can enroll in the mainstream class if you have a moderate intellectual disability and autism, but not in the ASD class. So plan 2 years in advance. You will need an up-to-date assessment. And it generally says, for my sins, for a piece of research one time, I looked at Dublin school enrollment policies. I read about 100 of them. And nearly all of them said you need an up-to-date assessment no more than 2 years old. You can get your assessment through the assessment and need process. I know that takes forever, but if you're willing to go the extra mile, you'll get it done in time. You might be able to avail of an Ieps assessment, because bear in mind, your child might be moving from primary to secondary. They may be moving from, and you've got this weird thing in Dublin as well, where there are junior primary schools and senior primary schools. We don't have that up the country. But, you might be moving even within the same school. They've got separate boards of management, different. So you will need up-to-date assessments. You might need to prepare a communications passport. I've got a quick slide in that now in a second. And just remember, people, I speak to parents and say, oh yeah, I rang around all the schools and they said they've no school place. Apply in writing. You've got no appeal against the refusal to enroll unless you've applied in writing. So always use the school's enrollment process, even if they say there's no place. It's always worth applying just in case there is a place. You'd never know if one comes up. That's what a communications passport is. Great tool. It helps the school. It helps your child. Might have a photo on it of them. This is just a generic template, but basically it'll tell things about your child to the school teacher. So especially if they're a young person that's non-verbal or with limited communication or they're shy, it can tell the school some of the things they like, some of the things they don't like. So for example, I remember when I was in college, I did a work placement in a special class, and 5 minutes before it was break time, they used to line the children up, and there was one of them, and it just a bug her, been lined up at the door to go out for a break and not been allowed to go out for a break. But if a teacher knew that in advance, they mightn't do it, or they're on certain medication. They might need to get, for example, they might have diabetes or something like that needs to be monitored, or what have you. So these are good things to put in a communications passport. And I would say communications passports, they even go into the health sector. And I know Inclusion Ireland, we're doing a session on health passports in Mayish kind of time. If you want to link into it, it's an option there for people. Leaving school, the one that is in my left, the bigger of those two booklets, it's really, really good. It's got all the options that are available. It's best accessed online because it's got all the hyperlinks. If you're interested in higher education, you click on the hyperlink, it brings you to where all the information is there around disability higher education. If it's HSE services, there's links to that there. It's all the options that are there, employability, all those things are in there, and they're really good. But just sorry, just go back on leaving school. When we said plan at least 2 years in advance, they say, on planning leaving school, sometimes it's wise even to be looking at this for young children with special education needs from the age of about 14 upwards. Especially if they're looking to get into employment, further education, training, that kind of stuff. Explore all the options. But all the options are in those booklets, and they're really easy to read and user friendly. It's just coming towards the end of this whistle stop tour. Some of the places where you can seek really good information and help, and actually something I should have added to this today and I didn't, we had a meeting with Community Law Mediation. They're over there in Coolock. So they've now started a child law clinic. So if you've got an issue and you think it might need a bit of legal advice, Community Law Mediation, Google them. You can speak to a solicitor for 20 minutes to half an hour for free. It saves you the £300 or £400 of going to Garrett Noble or Mason, Hayes and Curran or whoever you're going to go to. They may say to you, look, you need to take legal action and you're going to have to go to a solicitor, but at least you haven't paid a few £100 to find out. So look, as I said, you can contact Inclusion Ireland. We'll try and give a decent bit of advice and point people in the right direction. If your young person is an adult, National Advocacy Service, it's there for people. It's independent. It's an issues-based advocacy service. So if you've got any difficulty going on, they'll help you with it. Children's Rights Alliance, they've got a legal advice line. I think it only opens for 3 half days a week. Excuse me, but it is free. Ombudsman for Children's Office, a great source of information as well as making complaints. So really good place to go, and it's really good information that they'll be able to give you. The NCSE, lots of great information there. All the supports that are available. Again, I know the issue is the amount of those supports that are available and the availability of them. But the information that they have is first class. Workplace Relations Commission, you might think it's a weird place to go for information, but it is where the Equality Tribunal is located. And, you know, the Equal Status Act is equality in the provision of goods and services. Education is a service. So, for example, I remember somebody coming to me one time and they said, the school will not run the Leave and Cert applied program for my child. That's something you could go to the Workplace Relations Commission with. Whether it would get there. Access to the July provision program can certainly go to the Workplace Relations Commission. That's the legal advice we have. In terms, you know, we often are told about children that aren't allowed to go on the school skiing trip because, oh, you've got special education needs, you couldn't possibly go, right? Workplace Relations Commission, I'd suggest you might have a strong case in that respect. Now, just bear in mind that reasonable accommodations around Equal Status Acts, they have to be nominal cost reasonable accommodations. Citizens Information Centres, again, great places to go to. Unfortunately, they're shut at the minute with COVID, but a lot of the Citizens Information Centres have got advocates attached to them, and they may be able to even support you going to a meeting and that kind of thing. That's pretty much the end. I know I flew through that kind of stuff, and that's pretty, but I suppose the online space doesn't lend itself as well. If you've got any questions, pop them into the chat. Now, I have got a couple there, so